before we move forward, if we can go back a little bit, tell us about, you growing up, your interest in music. Who were the artists and writers?
My father, when I was growing up, used to play classical music in the house. There wasn't a lot of pop music. I come from a rock band background, but I think that was my way of playing against the grain of my family. My father, I remember him playing Beethoven over and over and over again. He had this box set of all 9 symphonies, but they were all albums, they were all records, and it was in this big box you could take part, and there were 12 records, or I don't remember how many albums were in there, but so I used to play that all the time. So I would say I grew up listening to a lot of that stuff. And then the very first record my father ever bought me was the Beatles' Yesterday and Today, which is the greatest hits.
Yeah.
And that sort of started me on my I think I want to play in a rock band.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, it's a sort of a diverse background of music listening from when I was a kid. So
classical is kind of in your DNA, but it's the Beatles kind of led you into the world of rock and pop. Definitely, the Beatles, and then right after that, Pink Floyd. When everything got a little weird when I was 13, things started to get a little funny. Yes. But yeah, I would say I listened to a lot of classical music because of my father. My father was sort of old school European, so he would always listen to classical music or opera was always playing in the house. Wow. And that was, yeah, kind of a downer, but yet very comforting. And was this in Southern California? No, I was born and raised in New York City. Oh, wow. Yeah. And when did you make the big move out here to Cali? Right after I graduated high school, I decided to get in a 1963 Corvair and drive as far west as I could go. And then all of a sudden there was water and I couldn't go any farther, and here I was. So you just put the gas in the car and headed west. Yeah. What did that adventure feel like, coming to the promised land, or what were your expectations coming to Hollywood? The expectation was that I was going to find success, and that was scary. It was a scary time, but it was like when you're 17. I was 17 when I did that. When you're 17, you just don't give a shit. You just go, and whatever happens, and that's exactly what happened. It all happened. So, yeah. Now, your partnership with Emerson, that goes back to New York, or that was out here? Yeah, no, actually, Emerson and I have known one another since we were in high school. We didn't go to high school together, but we had a lot of friends in common, and we were both child actors in New York, so we were always seeing each other at auditions for commercials and stuff, so we shared a few things in the Central Park's Sheep's Meadow, which is where teenagers would go to partake in lots of illicit activities. And so we sort of hung out. We never really played music together until we saw each other again out here, like years later. So he made the venture out here after you did? I don't know when he made that. I mean, he made the venture when he made the venture. We did that separately. Yeah. I think he may have come out a couple of years after I did, but he made the venture as well. Now, how did you end up hooking up back here? By mistake. I walked into a pool hall that he was managing, and I was like, "Can I get us to? I know you." And we started talking and started making music right after that. That's amazing. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So now, Tonic is obviously a big part of your life. Just gave you a great start in the songwriting and production. What was the goal? Was it just to have a good time and express yourself? What was the goal? Yeah, when you put the band, put the band together. Girls. What was girls? That's the goal. Okay. It's always the goal. Yeah. When you get a rock band, it's all about getting the girls. I mean, when you hear the girls screaming at the Beatles, you've got to have some of that. We were writing songs, and we were, wanting to be rock stars. Who doesn't want to be a rock star? And as soon as we started making records and writing songs together and playing, we sort of realized that we had something that was a little cooler than we had seen. Just
in terms of the stuff that was going on locally, and we had something special, you know, in the stuff that we were writing together and the stuff that we were playing together and singing together. So we just continued to do it, and then if you do something for long enough, you know, you just don't. There's nothing else to do. Like, you just keep doing it. And you know, we made a record, and somebody liked the songs that we had written and wanted to put it out. So we ended up touring, and then all of a sudden there was a lot of people liked our songs,
sure.
which was really cool.
And was that like a UK deal, the Polydor?
No, Polydor Atlas.
A&M,
it was we were signed here.
Okay.
Yeah, we started on Atlas Records, which then got changed into Polydor, which then got changed into A&M, which then got changed. I mean, we went through. I think our first album, I think we may have gone through like 7 labels. It was all the same label, but one got bought by another, got bought by another, got bought by another, and they kept consolidating and kept sort of putting it all together. Eventually, we ended up on Universal Records.
Yeah. So was there a common person, or it was just changing of the guard constantly?
The guy who signed us was this guy. His name was Nick Gatfield. He is the guy who discovered. I mean, he discovered a lot of bands.
Yeah.
I think he discovered Radiohead. He discovered a lot of really good music. And strangely enough, he was also in a little band called Dexy's Midnight Runners in the late '80s, which I always found to be very funny. I used to try to find videos of him and bring
some
it to him.
gypsy garb.
Yeah. That sort of changed into another label, and then there was other people. Al Cafaro, who was the head of A&M at the time, was very interested, and so that's why people started pulling us from label to label as labels were starting to merge, and eventually Doug Morris really wanted us on Universal Records. So when that merger happened, that was sort of the final, like, okay, we're going to take Tonic and put them on our label over here, and that was where we ended up.
Sure. And obviously, I mean, from the first album, you guys just hit so big. I mean, I guess one of the most radio played songs of the year.
It was that year, 1997, was sort of a long time ago.
Yeah, If You Could Only See,
Yep.
and everything on the first album. What was the feeling? Is, you know, you're making this music, and next thing you know, every time you turn on a radio, you're hearing your stuff. What was you remember the first time you heard it?
I do. I remember it very well. We were in a van in the middle of New Mexico, and it was the first time we'd ever heard one of our songs on the radio, and it was a really intense experience. We pulled the van over, and we all sort of were like totally blown away. It was before anything had happened, and we pulled the van over, and we all sort of looked at one another like, this is a big moment.
Felt you had made it.
And then it turned into, turn the fucking radio off, I can't hear that song again. It turned into that, which is unfortunate, but that's what happens. I mean, they played those few songs on that first record many, many, many times on the radio. And,
yeah.
You know.
Sure. So now Tonic has continued to evolve. You're still currently playing in the band, still writing songs. It's part of your life. Tell us the evolution of getting into scoring. What was the first move to know that you had a skill in doing this?
You know, it's hard to know that. Well, in 2000, somebody asked me to be in a movie as an actor, to play a rock kid, and I was like, okay, that sounds easy, because I had started out as an actor, when I was a teenager. So I did that. The director knew that I was actually a musician, which is one of the reasons why they hired me to do the movie. And he asked me if I would go in and play guitar on the score, and I said sure. So I went to the composer's house where he was writing the score, and I played on it. This is this guy that I've worked with now in the past and is actually one of my dearest friends now. His name is Ben. He was the composer, and I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world that I was like, he said, hey, look at the picture, and then, see what you can come up with to sort of fill this spot right here in between this dialogue and that dialogue. And it was just a really cool thing to do. So I sort of got the bug right then. And then I went back to my world in the band and sort of forgot about it for a few years until we took, the band took somewhat of a hiatus in 2006. Late 2005, we decided that we were going to take a bit of a break because we've been doing it for so long, and it was like time to, let's not do this for a minute. so my good friend Wendy Melvoin, who was half of the Wendy and Lisa duo, I was hanging out with her, and I was talking about, like, oh, you know, I really wanted to get into that kind of thing. And she invited me to her studio and said, why don't you come check it out? So I went and checked it out, and then ended up working for her and Lisa as, you know, an assistant first, and then writing additional music for them on a few shows that when they couldn't handle the whole load. And that was really the start of me getting into writing for film and television. I would say that I credit my ability in the craft to Wendy, who taught me a lot. I think that a lot of what you learn as an actor helps with writing music for film or television, because you really have more of an idea and an understanding of what the narrative really is. I mean, if you do, you have to have somewhat of an understanding of that kind of a thing to begin with, before you. Because I don't know that that's something that you can really learn. It's sort of understanding how narrative sort of moves around and how to fill those gaps and support it and or not support it is it's, I don't know how much of a learned thing that is. That might just be something of an instinct.
Yeah.
You know, because learning the craft of how to actually do it and where to put music is something you can learn, and I think that Wendy helped me with that a lot.
So it's kind of similar that you're making music, writing songs and playing in a band, but it's really different because you, rather than creating the foreground, being the hit and the hook and all that, you're kind of in the background.
Well, you know, the way I look at it is I treat it like I do when I write a song, except there's no vocalist and lyric. You know, there's no lyric and vocal. There is dialogue and narrative, and so I just treat it like that. So you treat it like you're writing a song, but stay out of the way of the vocal, and do everything you can to support the melody, and do everything you can to support the sentiment of the song. Yeah. And it's the same way, you know, you're doing everything you can to support the dialogue and doing everything you can to stay out of the way of the dialogue and to support the narrative of the piece. The only real difference is that in film and television, you're there to support the vision of the creator of the narrative. You know, you're not the creator of the narrative. And when you're writing a song, most of the time you're the creator or part of the creation of the narrative. And that's where the difference is. And many people who try to make the transition from writing songs and being the star or the foreground have a difficult time understanding how to be in support of someone else's vision at all times. That's the job. The job is make sure you are supporting that person's vision and what they want, their dreams and their vision of what it should be is what you're trying to put forward, as opposed to your own.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now tell us about some of the experiences that have led up to the Fargo soundtrack. What are some of the opportunities you've had so far?
You know, I've had a lot of opportunities and been very, very lucky. In terms of Fargo, it comes from a producer that I've worked with on his last two shows. And it was one of those things where it just sort of happened in a very sort of organic way. I met Noah in 2009 when he was putting together his very first show that he was creating, called The Unusuals. And, you know, they put out a call for composers, and I happened to be somebody who they liked my reel. So they asked me to do a demo to picture, and I did a demo, and they liked that, and then I flew to New York to meet Noah, and we sort of hit it off, and that has spawned this creative collaboration, which I think is great. You know, he's also a musician, so we speak the same language, which makes our collaborations very easy for me. When he says, "Can you do A, B, and C?" I understand exactly what he means. You know, so I would say that those experiences have led to, you know, where I am with Fargo. You know, after doing his last two shows, I think his first instinct was to talk to me about doing Fargo, and you know, I'm very fortunate to have that. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Well, take us inside, the Fargo soundtrack that's been released now, and kind of some of the elements that you draw upon, and the full scope of the piece.
Well, it was a tall order. Here is this iconic movie, and the order of the day was make sure people think that you're in this world. It has to feel like the movie felt, but it can't be the movie. So we don't want to use any characters from the movie. We don't use the story from the movie. It's not like a continuation of that story. This is, imagine a parallel story with different characters and different story altogether in a different place, but all in that same world. And I kind of had to treat the score in the same way, which is I had to use the vibe and the feeling that was created for the movie, but I didn't use the themes, and I didn't use the melodies, and I didn't use those same pieces from the movie because we had to sort of create our own identity. That was sort of a tall order. It's like, those are pretty big shoes to fill. Noah has these enormous shoes to fill in the Coen brothers, and I have this pretty big shoes to fill in terms of Carter Burwell because he wrote this really iconic score. So there were things that I knew I needed to change and things that I knew I didn't want to change about the actual feel of the score. The score itself is very cinematic, so I knew that I had to use a big orchestra to really, really drive home that feeling of this cold and lonesome, vast, open, snowy spaces. But I didn't want to use all the same, top-line instrumentation that Carter used because I didn't want to I didn't want to try to copy what he was doing. So it was a balancing act the whole time, until at some point, you sort of come into that moment where you're like, okay, yeah, I think I've now done that, and now I can continue to just create what I've created for the show. And I feel like Noah felt the same way. Once the first few episodes were written, we then moved past that and we became our own thing. I think the same thing sort of happened for the narrative of the story as well. Once that hump is crossed, once that that one threshold is crossed, like, okay, we know you're not the movie, we know you're not this, but it does still feel like this thing, which is really great. I think once we got past that, it became very easygoing.
It's great. And an opportunity to score, such an important show, and now the release of the soundtrack. What do you hope that does to enable you to do more, and what do you want to achieve more?
I think that you're only as good as your last thing that you've done, right? So I'm proud of the work that we did on Fargo. I all I can say is I hope people see that and like it and dig it, and I'm going to try to continue to do more work in that same vein. I mean, I'm super lucky to be able to work in this world, which is I'm working for a producer who understands music, and we have the same sort of ethic about how to use music in a narrative sense. We don't have too much music. We use music in a very, very effective way, meaning like we allow for these long periods of silence so that when music comes in, it's more effective and more important, and it's not just wallpaper of music. And I think that's a product of Noah's sensibility and the fact that FX allows us to do that without feeling like, oh my God, there's not enough music, and MGM, the same way. We really looked at this like a movie as opposed to like a television show. So I feel like I would love to be able to continue to do work like that. I'm also love to be able to do any kind of work with that satisfies the creative thing. I like to be able to work on things that I feel are good. There's a lot of stuff out there that that's not great artistic work. That's not to say that they're not valid, because I think every artistic statement has some validity. But I'm very lucky to be working in a medium that I think is shifting. TV really seems to be turning a corner in terms of how people are being allowed to make artistic statements. You know, FX is leading the charge, I think, you know, along with Showtime and HBO and some of these other networks that are really making really great work, you know, more like indie movies,
Yeah.
rather than television. And it's I think it's important. You know, some people are calling it the golden age of TV. I mean, I don't know what that really means. I just feel like TV has just gotten really good over the last 10 years since like The Sopranos started. I think that really turned a corner for what TV is, you know. Maybe all the people will realize what's going on and I'll make it all great.
So less limitations in network TV.
Well, I mean, network TV, they you know, and I do work on network TV, and I think that has its place, and people, you know, people like to see that kind of television as well. It's a totally different kind of TV. So, like I said, everything has its place, and everything has its validity. Mm-hmm. There are more constraints with broadcast network television. You know, the pacing is a lot different, and they want it to be different. That's what that kind of television is. Mm-hmm. And that's meaningful. People like to watch it. A lot of people watch NCIS. A lot. 20 million people or something, you know. And they do it in that way, and that's great, you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, continuing to, you know, write and play with Tonic, how do you shift gears, and is that another side of your creativity that stimulates what you do here?
Sure. I mean, everything stimulates everything, so, you know, switching gears is not an issue. I'm writing a
different
piece
sides of the brain.
Yeah, or not even different sides of the brain. It's like, I mean, at one minute I'm writing something for a violin. The next minute I have my guitar in my hand. I'm writing a song, or I'm, you know, up on stage playing a song of mine from whenever. I think it's all just music, you know. So I don't really have that much of a problem shifting gears. You know, I went from writing Hostages in December, which was a show for CBS, high energy, high action, you know, high tension, a lot of music, to writing Fargo, which was totally different. And it's just music, you know, so shifting gears is not really a thing that needs to be done. It's just you go from doing one thing to doing the next thing. It's like going from brushing your teeth to getting in the shower. They're two totally different things, but you do it, and it's not a big transition. So
sure.
Yeah.
And advice you'd give to any musicians that are playing music that, you know, would possibly want to do or get into scoring? Any advice to partake?
I hear that question a lot, and I don't know what the advice is. I mean, you just write music, and you know, a lot of having any success in any industry is about who you meet and who you know, and it's all about personality. You know, do you get along with somebody? That's going to be the first thing that people think. It's like they could love your music, but if you're, you know, hard to get along with, or you're that guy that's difficult, I don't know. I feel like maybe they're not going to want to work with you, you know. But there's no real advice that can answer the question of how do I get into something. You know, art is art, so you either make it or you don't. I mean, and I don't mean make it in terms of success. I mean, you either create art or you don't create art. And if you do, then just write music. And if you want to try to get into something, you know, continue to write music and then try to make the connections that can lead you to that, you know. I would say one of the things you can do is write as much as you can. So go on Craigslist and find people who are making little short movies or whatever and do them for free, because it gives you experience. Not necessarily experience to put on your resume, but it gives you the actual experience of doing something, because you can't learn how to do this job in a school. Like, they teach it, Berkeley teaches it, and, you know, Manhattan School of Music, or there's a million places that you can go to take classes in film scoring and take classes in working in television. But they can't teach you how to actually do the job. They can give you the tools and, you know, show you how to use the tools, but you either can write that kind of music or you can't. So I would say try writing that kind of music, you know. And do it as much as you can, because there's no substitute for actual experience.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess it really helps, like Wendy was to you, to find a mentor, someone who kind of show you the ropes.
That's true. I mean, you know, finding a mentor, someone who can, you know, you can actually sit and watch do the job, because that's the way to learn, is you sit and you watch somebody else actually do the job. Not teach you how to do the job, but as they're doing it. And that's the only way to really learn, I think, how to really do it.
Great.
I was very lucky in that way, that I had somebody. And most of the people I know who have gone on to be successful come from some school. The guy Ben, who I work with all the time, his mentor was Mike Post, who is, you know, arguably one of the biggest television composers ever. You know, Sean Callery is a person I just met and have become sort of like, you know, friendly with. His mentor was a guy named Mark Snow, who was, again, a huge television composer in the early 90s and still, you know, works now. So you always find, like, the people that you see is doing well, well, they had somebody teach them at some point. You know, I was lucky that Wendy and Lisa were happy to mentor me in that way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, you have an amazing studio here. Can you just kind of give us an idea of how you work as far as creating either to the scenes or some of the tools that you use?
I come from an old school approach from recording music, because I grew up working in recording studios, recording my music and bands and stuff like that, and worked a lot as an engineer and as a producer. So I set my studio up in a split sense, where I have my section that I work on composing, you know, for television and film. And a lot of that happens inside the box, like, you know, I'm using orchestra samples and stuff like that in order to create the score before I go to an orchestra. The other side of the studio, which is over there, is more like the analog side of the studio, because I like to record real instruments on all the scores that I do, and I also still make records with my band. I make records for myself. So there's an analog aspect of the studio. Like in the other room, there are drums that I use all the time, because I'm a drummer. I have guitar amps and guitars everywhere, and in there I'm actually currently sampling the destruction of a typewriter. And I would tell you what it's for, but then I'd have to kill you. Because
gotta wait to hear.
Yeah.
Otherwise, do I need to move?
No. And so the studio is sort of set up in a multiple multi-use fashion.
Okay.
I will go from here writing and listening to over there to recording any of the instruments that I play. That was really why I liked this particular room, is it gave me enough room to have all of it without having to have separate studios.
Sure.
You know.
So you have all the colors to paint with.
Yeah, and that's really the that's really what you want as a composer and a producer, is you want to have as many colors as you can manage, so you can put it all on the paper or not. You know, I can pick up a guitar, or I don't have to. You know, I have a lot of them right at my fingertips.